Pam Bondi drops a bomb. Federal Judge James Boasberg is crooked, and she's got the dirt to prove it. From hidden encrypted messages to a mind-blowing judicial cover-up, Bondi's digging reveals the ugly truth behind Boasberg's schemes. The political fallout is wild, and people are split. Some think Bondi's a hero, others think she's a problem. Will she bring down the judge, or will the system have his back? You don't want to miss the jaw-dropping twists. Watch till the end. Chapter 1. The accusation that shook the system. Pam Bondi stood at the podium, gripping it like she was holding the whole damn world in her hands. The room was packed, cameras flashing like a freaking storm. Reporters leaned in, scribbling every word. It was 8 a.m. on a Monday, but this wasn't just another day. Today, she was about to drop a bomb that'd flip everything upside down. Judge James Boasberg is corrupt, she said, voice sharp, unwavering. And I'm about to expose him for what he really is. The words hit like a sucker punch. The crowd gasped. Bondi didn't blink. She knew the battle ahead was going to be hell, but she didn't care. She wasn't here for games. This wasn't some petty political jab. No, this was way bigger. Pam Bondi, the Florida Attorney General, was going after a federal judge for stuff that could rock the whole justice system. Boasberg wasn't just any judge. This guy had deep ties to some serious political players, and now Bondi was bringing the heat. This wasn't about a single case or a wrong call. This was about a full-blown cover-up, one that stretched far beyond anything anyone had imagined. I'm not here to mess around. Bondi locked eyes with the reporters. Boasberg's actions have put lives in danger, and I won't let that slide. It's time for him to answer. The room buzzed with that nervous tension. Bondi just dropped a bomb that could end careers. Hell, it could take down political dynasties. She knew the backlash would come fast and hard, but she had the truth on her side. But what had Boasberg done? Why was this personal for Bondi? It started with one case. A case so loaded, so dangerous, it'd make anyone's head spin. The judge blocked the deportation of a gang tied to some seriously bad players. Cartel-level trouble. These weren't just your run-of-the-mill criminals. These were the kind of guys who wrecked entire states. And Boasberg? He slapped a restraining order on them, keeping them from being sent back to their countries. Bondi was pissed. Why the hell would a federal judge do that? Why stand in the way of justice when lives were at stake? The only thing that made sense was that Boasberg was in too deep. A deeper game, with strings pulled by powerful people, where the rules didn't apply to them. What Boasberg did wasn't just a mistake. Bondi's voice rose. It was sabotage. Judicial sabotage. The word hit hard. Sabotage. Bondi wasn't holding back, and she knew the storm brewing would be vicious. She turned to her team at the back of the room. They had the goods. Whistleblower testimonies, interviews with insiders, and, maybe most damning, encrypted messages from Boasberg's own phone, hinting at something far darker. But Bondi wasn't going to drop everything yet. No, she let it all unfold, piece by piece. As the press conference wrapped up, reporters swarmed her, throwing questions like darts. Some tried to downplay it, calling it just another political stunt. Others were hungry for the details. Bondi pushed through it all, calm and collected, like someone who knew she'd just made history. One reporter, with a skeptical edge in his voice, threw a question her way. You're really going after a sitting federal judge, Pam? That's huge. Think this could blow up in your face. Bondi paused, then turned slowly to lock eyes with him. If the system's broken, then it's time to fix it. No one should be above the law. Not even Boasberg. That hit harder than anything. As Bondi left the stage, her mind raced. She had just started a war, one that couldn't be backed out of. But she also knew she couldn't stop now. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. And Boasberg? He wasn't getting away with it. Back at her office, Bondi sat down at her desk. Her team was already working, gathering the evidence that would tear this scandal wide open. But there was something else. Something darker. Bondi felt it in her gut. Boasberg's decision to block the deportation wasn't the full story. There were bigger players involved, and she was going to find out who they were. She grabbed a thick file marked Boasberg from her desk. It wasn't just about one case. Inside, she found pages of complaints, questionable legal rulings, and ties to people rumored to be involved in shady deals. Bondi felt the weight of what she was about to uncover. The investigation was just starting, and it was already clear this wasn't just about a crooked judge. This was about a whole system that needed to be torn down and rebuilt. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from an anonymous source. The words sent a chill through her. Boasberg is just the tip of the iceberg. This goes all the way to the top. The real question wasn't if Boasberg would fall. The real question was who else would go down with him. Chapter 2. The Deep Dive. Uncovering the Hidden Truth. Pam Bondi sat at her desk, hands shaking as she stared down at the pile of documents. The press conference was over, but now the real work kicked in. Accusing Judge James Boasberg of corruption had caused a stir, but now Pam had to back it up. One wrong move, and everything she built could come crashing down. The weight of the situation was suffocating. "All right, let's get to work," she muttered, slamming her fist on the desk, trying to shake off the nerves. She had a team of investigators working overtime to dig up every shred of dirt on Boasberg. But this wasn't just about finding evidence. It was about crafting an airtight case, one that no one could sweep under the rug. Her phone buzzed. An encrypted message from one of her most trusted sources, a former insider who'd worked closely with Boasberg for years. The message read, "We're getting close, Pam. I've got something big, but you need to meet in person." Pam didn't think twice. She grabbed her coat and stormed out the door. This was the break she'd been waiting for. The meeting took place in a quiet cafe on the edge of town. Pam arrived early, scanning the room for her contact. Her eyes locked on a man sitting in the corner, nervously glancing around. She knew it was him. Without a word, she slid into the seat across from him. The man, a former clerk who'd worked under Boasberg, leaned in, his voice barely audible above the sound of coffee cups clinking. "You're playing a dangerous game," he whispered. "Boasberg isn't just a judge. He's deep in with some serious players, politicians, lobbyists, even international connections. If you think taking him down is going to be easy, you're dead wrong." Pam didn't flinch. "I'm not here for the easy way out. I'm here to bring him down. So what do you have for me?" The man hesitated, then slid a folder across the table. "This is everything. Messages, phone records, testimonies. It's all here." Boasberg didn't just block that deportation order. He's been covering up political corruption for years. He's been working with people who think they're untouchable. You can't let this go. Pam opened the folder, her heart racing as she scanned the contents. Encrypted messages, names, dates, locations. This was the smoking gun she'd been hoping for. But one problem, the names connected to these documents were linked to some seriously powerful people. People who could bury this investigation before it even got started. "This is bigger than I thought," Pam muttered, her mind reeling. "Boasberg's just a pawn in a much bigger game." "Exactly," the man replied, his voice shaking. "You're messing with dangerous people. If you go public with this, they'll come after you. And they'll do it without hesitation." Pam processed the information. This was no longer just about a crooked judge. This was about exposing a deep network of corruption that had been running the game for years. Boasberg was just the tip of the iceberg, and she was about to dive headfirst into the cold, murky waters. "I'm not backing down," Pam said, her voice steely. "I've come this far. I'm not stopping now." The man looked at her, fear in his eyes. "Be careful. These people won't hesitate to destroy you. They've done it before, and they'll do it again." Pam nodded. She knew the risks, but she also knew that if she didn't act now, she'd be letting the system stay broken, with people like Boasberg at the helm. And that was something she couldn't live with. Back in her office, Pam sat down with her team to go over the evidence. It was clear Boasberg wasn't acting alone. Too many connections, too many powerful people involved. The encrypted messages revealed talks about hiding documents, stalling cases, and manipulating decisions to benefit political bigwigs. And this wasn't just a one-off. This was happening across multiple cases, all aimed at protecting the untouchables. "We've got the goods," Pam said, her voice cold. "But we need to make sure we're ready. This isn't just about Boasberg anymore. This is about taking down an entire system." Her team nodded. They'd already interviewed several whistleblowers willing to testify, but they needed more. They needed solid, irrefutable evidence to stand up in court. And that meant digging even deeper. Pam's gaze fell on the encrypted message logs. One name kept popping up over and over: Signalgate. It was a code name, and Pam knew it had to be tied to something much bigger. She'd heard rumors, but nothing concrete. Now it was time to figure out exactly what Signalgate was. The next few days flew by in a blur. Pam's team worked tirelessly, tracking down leads and cross-referencing documents. The deeper they dug, the more the story unfolded. Signalgate wasn't just some encrypted chat app. It was a tool, a method used by Boasberg and his network to communicate covertly. They were covering their tracks, hiding the truth. Pam knew they had to move fast. If they didn't act soon, they might lose their chance to expose everything. But every step they took seemed to lead them deeper into dangerous territory. This wasn't just about Boasberg. It was about dismantling a web of corruption that stretched far beyond the courtroom. "I don't care how deep it goes," Pam said one night, staring her team down. "We're going to expose it all, no matter what it takes." And so, the investigation continued. More intense, more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The pressure was mounting. The stakes were higher than ever. But Pam was relentless. She wouldn't stop until the truth was out. Boasberg was just the beginning. The real fight was about to begin. Chapter 3: Signalgate, the secret that could bring Boasberg down. The files in front of Pam Bondi were like pieces of a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. The deeper she dug into Judge James Boasberg's shady dealings, the more tangled the web became. But one piece stood out, a name that had been popping up again and again, one that sounded like a code: Signalgate. It was a mystery wrapped in an enigma, and Pam could feel she was just starting to scratch the surface. Sitting at her desk, Pam stared at the encrypted messages on her screen. Her team had managed to intercept some communications, but nothing made sense. All they had were cryptic conversations, strange exchanges, and mentions of an app called Signal, an encrypted messaging app popular with those who wanted to keep their conversations off the radar. Boasberg's people weren't just trying to avoid the law. They were hiding something much bigger, and Signal was their weapon of choice. "Pam, you need to see this," Lucas, one of her investigators, called from the other side of the office. His voice was a mix of excitement and fear, a sure sign he'd found something major. Pam grabbed the files and walked over to his desk, where he'd pulled up the decrypted messages. She scanned the screen, heart racing. The first message was dated months before Boasberg made the controversial ruling on the deportation case. "Make sure this stays off the record. Boasberg's involved. We need him to delay the deportations. He's our guy." Pam's stomach twisted. This was it, the smoking gun. But one message wasn't enough to take down a federal judge. She needed more. More context, names, dates, anything to connect Boasberg to these shady characters more firmly. Lucas clicked to the next message. It was even worse. Boasberg confirmed. He'll stall the hearing. He said the right people will make sure nothing happens. Right people? Pam murmured, her mind racing. What was Boasberg involved in? Who were these right people? Was he taking bribes? Or was this just some high-level political chess game? Pam wasn't one to back down from a fight, but this felt like stepping into a storm without any protection. Each new message added more weight to the pile. It was becoming clear, Boasberg wasn't just a judge who made mistakes. He was actively involved in something much darker, something far more dangerous. "What's the next move?" Lucas asked, his voice low. Pam didn't answer right away. She was piecing it all together in her mind. She couldn't go public with this. Not yet. She needed to dig deeper, find out who was pulling Boasberg's strings. She had a hunch that if she followed the Signal trail, it would lead her to a place no one had dared to go before. "I'll need access to more," she said, her voice cold and determined. "Find out who Boasberg's been in contact with through this app. We need to know who else is involved." The next few days were a blur. Pam's team dove into the Signal app like their lives depended on it. They pulled up old chat logs, cross-referenced names, tracked the flow of money, and traced connections that all led back to Boasberg. But nothing could have prepared Pam for what they uncovered. One name kept showing up: Mark Kincaid, a top lobbyist with his hands in everything from local elections to federal appointments. According to the messages, Boasberg wasn't just a judge for Kincaid. He was a pawn. Pam stood over the files. Her eyes narrowed as she read through the exchanges. Kincaid is pushing for a delay on the immigration cases. If Boasberg can hold things up a little longer, we could get a better deal. Don't let him slip up. It was crystal clear now. Boasberg wasn't just blocking deportations on his own. He was under Kincaid's control. Kincaid was manipulating the system for his own gain, using Boasberg as a tool. This wasn't just a minor infraction. It was a full-blown scandal. All right, we've got the pieces. But this is bigger than we thought, Pam said, her voice icy. It's not just about Boasberg anymore. Kincaid's involved, and he's got connections that reach far beyond the city. Lucas nodded. This could get ugly, Pam. Kincaid's got allies in the highest places. You're about to go up against a whole network of corruption. I didn't get into this job to back down. Pam replied, her tone unyielding. We're going all the way with this. That night, Pam couldn't sleep. Her mind kept racing. Back to the messages, to the name Kincaid, to the sense that something far worse was lurking just below the surface. She knew exposing Boasberg and Kincaid would be a battle, but what she didn't know was how far this thing would go. How many more names would she have to add to the list? The next day, Pam called a meeting with her closest allies. She couldn't afford to waste time. If she was going to take down a judge, a lobbyist, and possibly an entire network of people who had been running the legal system for their own benefit, she needed everyone on the same page. You guys ready to take this to the next level? She asked, her voice sharp with anticipation. Her team exchanged glances, then nodded. We got the evidence. We know who's behind this. It's time to go public, Lucas said, his voice confident, though tinged with caution. But we need to be careful. These people will fight back, and they'll fight dirty. Pam's eyes burned with determination. Then we'll fight back harder. By the end of the week, Pam was ready to make her move. She had everything she needed, solid evidence, strong witnesses, and enough dirt on Boasberg and Kincaid to bury them both. But Pam was about to learn that when you go up against the powerful, the game changes. They had their own rules, and they weren't afraid to break them. The question now wasn't just whether she could bring Boasberg and Kincaid down. The real question was how much of a fight it would take, and how much damage Pam would have to endure to expose the truth. As Pam stood at the edge of what felt like a precipice, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't backing down. This was her fight, and she was ready to make them all answer for what they'd done. Chapter 4, Political Storm, the Fallout Begins. Pam Bondi stood in front of the television, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of her desk. The news had just broken, and it was everywhere. Headlines flashed across the screen, and reporters scrambled to cover the story, twisting the narrative in every direction. She had known this moment would come, but nothing could prepare her for the intensity of the backlash. Political hit job. Bondi targets federal judge with unsubstantiated claims. One headline screamed. Another report labeled it a desperate ploy by a politician facing a tough election season. Unbelievable, Pam muttered under her breath, frustration building inside her. The media had already painted her as the villain. The whispers started before her press conference even ended, labeling her accusations as politically motivated. Critics were everywhere, accusing her of using her office to settle scores. But Pam didn't care. She had known the risk from the start. This is just the beginning, she told herself, determined to stand her ground. But still, the pressure was mounting. The media storm was growing stronger, and Pam could feel the eyes of the entire country on her. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her team. Lucas had bad news. Pam, we've got an issue. Boasberg's lawyer just filed for a gag order. If the judge signs off, this investigation could be shut down fast. Pam cursed under her breath. Boasberg wasn't wasting time. He was already using his legal connections to fight back. She couldn't let this slide. Not now. She knew she had to go on the offensive. Turning to her assistant, Pam barked, "Give me Boasberg's lawyer." Now, it wasn't long before Pam found herself in another battle. This time with one of the most seasoned and ruthless defense attorneys in the game, William Carter. Known for winning cases by any means necessary, Carter wielded his vast network and influence to tilt the scales of justice in his favor. If Boasberg's people were getting involved, Pam knew the stakes had just gone through the roof. She met Carter in a private conference room in a high-rise downtown. He was already seated, leaning back in his chair with that smug, self-assured look Pam had seen in so many of the system's insiders. He didn't rise to greet her. He didn't need to. He was already playing his hand. "Pam, I've heard the chatter. You're digging into things you shouldn't be. I'd strongly advise you back off before this gets out of control," Carter said, his voice low and steady. He leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "Boasberg has friends in high places. You really want to go to war with him?" Pam didn't flinch. She'd been preparing for this moment. "I'm not backing down, Carter. If you think you can intimidate me with your threats, you're wrong. Boasberg is guilty. I've got the proof." Carter smirked. "Proof? Please. What do you have? A couple of encrypted messages? You're playing with fire, and you're about to get burned. I'm not scared of you or your threats." Pam shot back, her voice sharp as steel. "The people deserve to know the truth. If you're really that confident in your guy, then let's see him defend his actions in court. But don't try to silence me, Carter, because if you do, it won't just be Boasberg who comes under fire. It'll be the entire system. And trust me, people are tired of being lied to." Carter paused, staring at her for a long moment, sizing her up. Pam could feel the tension in the room, the unspoken challenge in the air. He wasn't used to losing, and he certainly wasn't used to being spoken to like this. But Pam wasn't afraid. She had nothing to lose. "Fine," Carter finally said, a sneer crossing his face. "But you won't last. You're out of your depth. We'll see how long you can keep this charade up." Pam didn't wait for the meeting to end. She had enough of Carter's games. But as she walked out of the room, more bad news came her way. Her political opponents were already using this scandal to discredit her. They'd started circulating a narrative that Pam was just trying to make a name for herself, accusing her of overreaching and playing dirty politics. The media had jumped on it, and the public was split. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from a trusted source. A whistleblower from Boasberg's circle, someone who had agreed to meet her in secret. The message was simple but chilling. Boasberg isn't the only one with skeletons. Kincaid's got dirt on some very powerful people. He's pulling strings you haven't even begun to uncover. Pam's heart skipped a beat. Kincaid again. This wasn't just about Boasberg anymore. The rabbit hole was far deeper than she ever imagined. She quickly made arrangements to meet the whistleblower at a discreet location. Time was running out, and she needed every piece of intel she could get before the system completely closed ranks. The meeting took place in a small, inconspicuous diner on the outskirts of town. Pam sat in a booth, scanning the room for any signs of danger. The place was too quiet, almost eerie. The only sound was the faint hum of a jukebox playing in the background. She waited, tense, until the door opened. A man in his late 40s walked in, wearing a worn leather jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He slid into the seat across from Pam, giving her a quick, nervous glance. "Do you have the proof?" Pam asked, cutting straight to the chase. The man nodded. "Yeah, I've got it. But you need to understand something. This goes way beyond Boasberg and Kincaid. There are people involved in this mess who can make all of this disappear with a snap of their fingers. You're about to step into a war, Pam. A war you can't win alone." Pam leaned forward, eyes locked on his. "Who else is involved?" He slid a folder across the table, thick with documents and photos. "This is just the start. I've been tracking Kincaid's dealings for years. He's got connections in Congress and the White House. Hell, even the DOJ has been on his payroll. Boasberg is just the tip of the iceberg." Pam flipped through the folder, her stomach sinking with each page. This wasn't just about corruption. This was a full-blown conspiracy that had been operating under the radar for years. The system was rigged, and Pam had just uncovered the first real proof of it. She slammed the folder shut, her jaw clenched in rage. "It's worse than I thought." The man gave her a sad look. "I told you, if you push this, you won't just take down Boasberg. You'll take down everyone. But you need to decide if you're ready for that." Pam stood up, her resolve hardening. "I'm ready. Let the storm come." As Pam walked out of the diner, her mind raced. The fallout from this investigation was just beginning. Boasberg, Kincaid, and the system they had built, none of it would survive the truth. But the question was no longer if they would be taken down. The real question was how far Pam was willing to go, and how much of herself she would have to sacrifice to bring it all down. The storm was coming, and Pam wasn't backing down. Chapter 5. Boasberg's Dirty Past. The web of corruption unravels. Pam Bondi sat at her desk, staring at the documents scattered in front of her. What had started as an investigation into a judge blocking deportations had snowballed into something far darker. What once seemed like a single case of misconduct was now a vast conspiracy involving political elites, shady dealings, and years of questionable rulings. Pam was no longer hunting down a corrupt judge. She was going after an entire rigged system. "Where's the rest of the intel?" Pam snapped, pacing back and forth in her office. She had just uncovered a troubling connection, one that could be the key to everything, but there were still too many pieces missing. She needed more. Lucas, one of her most trusted investigators, stood beside her desk, flipping through a thick file. "We've dug into Boasberg's past, Pam, and the deeper we go, the more we're starting to see a pattern. He's been involved in some seriously questionable decisions, especially with immigration cases. But it's not just that. There are people, powerful people, who have been pulling his strings for years." Pam didn't have time for half-truths. "Get to the point, Lucas." He handed her a set of photos, one she didn't want to see. There was Boasberg, shaking hands with well-known political figures, all smiles, but something in his eyes was unsettling. These weren't the photos of a judge with integrity. These were the photos of a man who had sold out. "Here," Lucas said, pointing at the first image. "Boasberg with Mark Kincaid. You remember him, right? He's the one behind the shady deals we've been tracking. Kincaid isn't just any lobbyist. He's a kingmaker. If Boasberg's with him, this isn't a coincidence." Pam's stomach twisted. She'd heard Kincaid's name mentioned over and over, but seeing these pictures, seeing Boasberg cozying up with one of the most powerful men in the room, made everything feel real. This was bigger than she'd ever imagined. The connections were deeper than she could have ever guessed. "And this?" Pam asked, flipping to the next photo. This one showed Boasberg meeting with a congressman, shaking hands over a bill that seemed to have Boasberg's approval. "Are we supposed to believe this is just business as usual?" "No way," Lucas said, shaking his head. "This was about more than just a bill. Boasberg has been involved in high-level decisions that benefited Kincaid and his associates. We're talking about rulings with massive financial implications. This wasn't an accident. This was planned." Pam clenched her fists, trying to suppress the wave of anger that hit her. She had suspected corruption, but this was a full-scale operation. Boasberg wasn't just a bad judge. He was a cog in a much larger machine. And the more she uncovered, the more she realized that the machine ran far deeper than she could have imagined. Later that day, Pam stood in front of a wall of documents, piecing everything together. Her office had become a war room, cluttered, chaotic, but organized in a way that only Pam could understand. She had the evidence. She had names. The connections were starting to make sense. She wasn't just fighting Boasberg anymore. She was fighting an entire network of corruption that stretched into the very heart of the political system. The game had changed, and Pam knew she was in too deep to back out now. Her phone buzzed with a text from her team. "We got something big. Boasberg's rulings aren't just politically motivated. He's been hiding his financial ties to Kincaid and others in plain sight. He's been using his position to steer millions of dollars in contracts to companies linked to Kincaid. And it's all connected to immigration." Pam's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't believe it. But as she read through the message, everything started to click. The deportation orders, the delays, the strategic rulings that seemed to always favor Kincaid's interests. Boasberg hadn't been acting alone. He'd been getting paid, manipulating the system to line his pockets and the pockets of others. "That son of a bitch," Pam muttered under her breath, her blood boiling. "This is worse than we thought." She picked up the phone and dialed Lucas. "I need everything on Kincaid. All of it. If this goes as deep as I think it does, we could bring them all down, Boasberg, Kincaid, and anyone else who's involved. But we need to go all in." The next few days were a blur of activity. Pam's team worked around the clock, digging through financial records, tracking down anonymous sources, and connecting the dots. They weren't just uncovering Boasberg's actions. They were exposing the entire system that had allowed people like him to get away with it for so long. One evening, as Pam was reviewing the final pieces of the puzzle, Lucas came into her office, his face grim. "We found something," he said, holding a thick file in his hands. "It's a document from Boasberg's personal bank account. There's a transfer of over $200,000 to a shell company linked to Kincaid's lobbying firm. It's a pay-for-play scheme, Pam. This wasn't about making decisions. This was about money." Pam's hand shook as she flipped through the file. The evidence was right there, clear as day. This wasn't just a judge making mistakes. This was a man using his position to line his pockets and destroy the integrity of the justice system in the process. "I knew it," she said quietly, her voice thick with anger. Boasberg wasn't a pawn. He was the kingpin. And Kincaid? He's the puppet master. They've been running this scam for years. "Not just them," Lucas added, his voice low. "There's more. We've got people from a DOJ, congressmen, even some big corporate names tied to this. If we expose all of this, we're talking about the biggest political scandal in decades. But Pam, this won't be easy. The blowback is going to be massive. These people will do anything to protect their secrets." Pam leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. This was it. This was the moment she'd been preparing for. If they went public with this, there was no turning back. The system would fight back hard, but she couldn't stop now. The truth had to come out. "I'm not backing down," Pam said, her voice resolute. "They've had their time. Now it's our turn. Let's bring the whole damn thing down." As the investigation reached its peak, the pressure on Pam intensified. The media was relentless, and her political enemies were sharpening their knives. But Pam didn't care. She wasn't fighting for her career anymore. She was fighting for something much bigger, the truth. Boasberg and Kincaid had made their move. Now it was time for Pam to make hers. And she wasn't about to let anyone stand in her way. The system might have been rigged, but Pam wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not on her watch. Chapter 6. The Encrypted Truth. Boasberg's fall begins. Pam Bondi leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. The files in front of her were a roadmap to a conspiracy that ran deeper than she could have ever imagined. She had thought she uncovered the worst of Boasberg's corrupt dealings, but now she was holding the smoking gun, the final piece that could bring him down for good. It was an encrypted message, buried in a sea of other communications, but this one was different. It was the moment everything clicked. The name that had been haunting her throughout this investigation, Kincaid, was mentioned once again. But this time there was more, much more. "Pam, you've got to see this," Lucas called out from the other side of the room. His voice was sharp, tinged with excitement. Pam didn't need to be told twice. She was already on her feet, walking over to Lucas's desk, her heart pounding. "What did you find?" she asked, her voice steady, though the anticipation was thick in the air. Lucas turned the screen toward her. "This message, it's from Boasberg himself, but it's clear he's not just working with Kincaid. He's been helping cover up their entire operation. And it's bigger than we thought, Pam. It's huge." Pam squinted at the screen, her eyes scanning the message. The words jumped off the page. "Make sure the evidence is buried. If it comes out, we all go down. Kincaid will handle the rest." Her heart skipped a beat. Boasberg had been in on this all along. He hadn't just been influenced by Kincaid. He had been actively participating in the cover-up. This wasn't just about political connections. It was about hiding the truth at all costs. If this message got out, it would confirm everything Pam had suspected, and then some. "Boasberg's done," Pam muttered under her breath. "This is it. We've got him." Later that night, Pam sat at her desk, the weight of the discovery pressing down on her. She knew what she had to do. This wasn't just about exposing one corrupt judge anymore. This was about exposing a network of political power hidden behind encrypted messages and shady deals. Boasberg wasn't just a bad apple. He was part of a rotten system that needed to be torn down.